Putting it bluntly, does Israel own the American Congress? Putting it bluntly, does Israel own the American Congress?
Well, own it, I think, is too strong.
I'm Larry King. Joining me from Watertown, Massachusetts, is Kirk Beatty. He is an expert on Mideast politics, also the author of a stunning new book, Congress and the Shaping of the Middle East. Thanks for being with us, Kirk.
Thank you very much for having me.
Netanyahu and Obama met this week. It appeared to be very cordial, certainly the nicest meeting they've had in a while, and while there's strong disagreement over Iran, they say that they can get beyond that. Do you think so?
Well, I think there are still a lot of fundamental issues that will be rather difficult for them to iron out, beginning again with the one I focus on most in the book, which is that of resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But there's a lot of a need, of course, at present for trying to get together to address other important issues in the region, beginning with the conflict in Syria and also looking, of course, at the situation in Iran still, which, although a major agreement was struck just this last summer, is one that has left people wary about where things might be going in the future.
President Clinton told me that of all the conflicts in the world that he had to deal with, this was the most troublesome, the one that puzzled him the most. He thought he had to deal with Arafat once and nothing happened, and he didn't see a solution coming for a long while. What do you think of that?
Right. Well, it certainly doesn't look like one is in the offing right now again. I think that there's a lot of attention focused again on the other major issues in the area, again beginning with the threat from the Islamic State. This is preoccupying people not only in the region and here, but of course people in so many parts of Europe as well. And once you have distractions of that magnitude and issues of that magnitude, then I think it makes it extremely difficult for people to get the parties together to focus on how to resolve something that has proven to be so intractable over such a great length of time. I would argue, though, that I think it still is important for people to try to keep their eyes on the Israel-Palestine issue and Arab-Israeli relations, more broadly speaking as well, just because that serves as an important backdrop to what is fueling difficulties with other states in the area, and also with perceptions of the U.S. role around the world, basically.
Netanyahu made it sound simple. He'll recognize a two-state policy if they'll just say Israel exists, and they will coexist with them and recognize the borders and live with it. Why is that so hard?
Well, I think it's difficult because perhaps he's trying to take a bit too simplistic of an approach to it in terms of at least the way he's presenting it to the general public. I think that it's unlikely that we'll see real progress unless the issue, for example, of settlement growth and expansion, which when he was speaking to the Center for American Progress the other day, said people should look at more closely because he really didn't see anything important in the way of expansion of Israeli settlement activity on the West Bank, when I think that a lot of other people that are paying careful attention to this see something quite different happening on the ground. And so I'm again pessimistic, I guess, in terms of where things are going right now. Basically, you've had also major actors like President Obama himself not foreseeing any successful resolution of the conflict for the rest of his stay in power, and that doesn't bode well for where then things are going in the next year or so, at least.
Your book is titled Congress and the Shaping of the Middle East. You certainly know the territory.
Yes.
Putting it bluntly, does Israel own the American Congress?
Well, own it, I think, is too strong. But certainly it has established an extremely powerful presence there, which I try to demonstrate in the book is manifested in a number of different ways. I begin by looking at the fact that actually, even as individuals try to present themselves as candidates for seats in Congress, they face a certain set of hoops that they feel that that they have to jump through. On many occasions, they experience a lot of pressure from various interest groups, but the interest groups which are the ones that have proven most successful are those that are tending to be not just pro-Israel. I think pro-Israel in general is accurate, but also ones that are more supportive of right-wing Israeli governments.
So these lobbies are the key, right?
So the lobbies do indeed play a very, very important role. In some ways, one can look at the activity of AIPAC and the power of AIPAC, and one could see simply by the math, looking at the size of AIPAC's budget, for example, how much larger it is by a magnitude of 10 or 15 at least of many of the other smaller groups against which it's competing. Now, you have to keep in mind the fact that it is competing not just with groups that one might on the surface identify as pro-Arab and so forth by their name, or more Iranian interest groups, but also from other interest groups from the Jewish American community. So you have people that are in Americans for Peace Now or Israel Policy Forum, for example, or Voices for Jewish Voices for Peace, that are extremely active in this issue area, but they're very heavily outspent and outgunned, and at a loss to kind of keep in stride with the material and support that AIPAC can begin to staffers.
So AIPAC is the more powerful of all of them?
Yes, far and away, without any close competitor whatsoever.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
AIPAC say, though, Israel is the only pure democracy in the whole area, and shouldn't that be our prime source of support?
Yes, I think that's an important argument, and one hears constantly from the Israeli leadership, regardless of who's been in power in Israel, and as one does hear from American leaders as well, that there's a consonance of values between Israel and that of the United States, and I think there's some legitimacy to that point. Where it becomes problematic, though, is that it has been U.S. policy for many, many decades to look at the circumstances prevailing in other countries in the region and to, quite frankly, pass judgment on many of those countries as being not ready for democracy. That's kind of a standard adage that one would hear in conjunction with those other countries. And therefore that it has been incumbent upon the U.S. government to try to take sides with and provide support even to more authoritarian leaders in the area, even though their values are not the same as our own. One could look, for example, at the nature of relations between the U.S. government and Jordan, or the nature of U.S. relations between the U.S. government and Saudi Arabia, to see, on balance, over the decades, a considerable amount of stability. And so, yes.
Is Obama kind of between a rock and a hard place here?
I think he really is. You know, obviously he is facing very strong opposition from within his own Congress. I think that people can look at what happened earlier in this calendar year over the Iran issue, and people who are desirous of seeing some wiggle room left for the president, or some ability to make certain strides and to impose, you know, to see his own policies come out ahead of those being recommended by other organizations like that of AIPAC, that can take some solace in the victory that was registered over the Iran issue. But again, on balance, I think that he's in an extremely difficult spot. And now, of course, people are already beginning to look forward to, and Obama himself, being a good member of his party, is looking forward to what the consequences may be of his policy positions with respect to how well any of his Democratic colleagues might fare in the upcoming election, especially, of course, with Mrs. Clinton being in the lead in that regard.
I was in Israel recently. There's a lot of support for that Iran deal in Israel.
Very interesting.
It is not black and white.
very interesting. And I think that that diversity that exists there is one which is less well known in this country, just as often the diversity that exists in other countries in the region, like in Iran, and the tremendous support that actually exists in Iran among the general public is something that is not as well known in this country either. And so often we see a situation in this country where there may be a stronger mobilization of sentiment of a pro-Israel nature and less dissent or less dissent reflected in the media than is the case in other countries, and less dissent than one sees, for example, in Israel itself over issues such as the one that, such as the dissent that you were mentioning a moment ago.
There has never been a great tie between the American Jewry and the evangelical movement. In fact, there's been a lot of hostility. Why this closeness over Israel?
Well, it's a very long and interesting story, actually. It has a lot to do with the fact that, of course, people in the American evangelical community, not all of them, but an important segment of people in that community, are people who look at the creation of Israel, the modern-day creation of Israel, as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And so they look at having stronger ties to Israel and members of the Israeli community as something that is advancing the biblical process and the arrival of the end times, so to speak. Now, I discovered when I was doing my research that the staffers themselves don't really hear all that much from the evangelical community when it comes to the Israel-Palestine or Arab-Israeli conflict issue. So this is more something that is being used at the elite level in certain evangelical circles to try to, you know, curry favor with Israelis and so forth. And the Israelis, of course, are happy to take advantage of, well, right-wing Israelis are very happy to take advantage of the interest in Israel that has been expressed by the evangelical leadership.
Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, not in the near future, unfortunately. No. I have taught on this subject for now more than 3 decades. And over that period, there have only been a couple of occasions when I thought that people were coming close to maybe being able to solve the conflict. But then you have events like the assassination of Rabin or the assassination earlier on of President Sadat of Egypt. And so people who may have been in a position to be very strong advocates of peace have been taken out of the picture, and the turmoil that has brought in those countries and elsewhere, of course, has brought a downward spiral. And so I'm not very optimistic at all right now, I have to say, unfortunately.
Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Larry. It was a pleasure.
The book is Congress and the Shaping of the Middle East. I have it right here in my hand. It is out now, and it's available in hardcover or for downloading. More politicking right after the break.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.